Okay, it is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Susan Forcey, who is not from UVic, and she's instead from Thompson Rivers University. When I have attended articulation committees over the past year, the number one topic I hear is artificial intelligence, but easily the number two topic I hear about is micro-credentials. And they're here to tell us a little bit more about what is going on in the world of micro-credentials and to give us a glimpse into the future of micro-credentials. Please welcome Susan from TRU.
Thank you. You know how hard it is to stand up here after all the exceptional presentations that have gone on today? So I'm shaking a little bit, it's that bad. So yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about micro-credentials and just a tiny glimpse into the future. My name is Susan, and I'm the Director of Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition at Thompson Rivers University. I've been quite excited to hear the talk about prior learning today, or recognition of prior learning. Before I start, I just want to do a territorial acknowledgement. A lot of the learning that I'm about to share today was done on the Kamloops-Shirepnik land, which is TRU's first house, and our second house is Tahalk, which is the Williams Lake First Nations, which also is the northern region of the Shirepnik peoples, but also we have the Carriers, the Silcoteen kind of at that intersection. So I want to thank them for allowing us the opportunity to live, work, learn, and play on their land. When is this going to move? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to go back. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about TRU, a little bit about it. What is prior learning assessment? Because I recognize the name shared quite a bit, but not everybody understands what it is. I'm going to talk about a partnership that we embarked on with the provincial government to see if we could use prior learning assessment strategies, techniques, assessment methods to assess micro-credentials in the province, and this is where that glimpse comes in. I'll share a little bit about the why and the how we did it, and really importantly, what did we learn, what are our next steps, and then what's not included here is what are your questions and comments. So I'll start by this beautiful picture of the Williams, I was born and raised in Williams Lake, so it's always on my mind. This is Kamloops though. Williams Lake has not grown that big. But this is Kamloops, and TRU has 9 faculties in school. Sometimes the head count surprises people. We have just over 27,000 students, about slightly more than half through the open learning programs, the distance education, and then the other half roughly is through the face-to-face programs. International students are a fairly high number, 24%. Indigenous students are just over 1,200. So just to give you a little bit of context on that. Now, prior learning assessment is extremely hard to share in one slide, never mind one bullet. But essentially, I'm going to try it. It is a process to assess formal and informal learning. Now, think about some of the most profound learning you've had, and did it come in your education, or did it come in other shapes, forms, or sizes? So it might be the learning you volunteered to do a fundraising project for the hospital, you imagined an event, you coordinated the event, you worked on the event, and you raised millions of dollars. Think about the profound learning that would have been in that experience. Or perhaps it's the person sitting beside you, and they've been an amazing mentor to you throughout the last few years, and the learning that's happened there. Or the project that you planned and you organized, such as an event like this, or going to events like this. These are all types of learning that we don't often give enough value or recognition to. So that is what prior learning is. It's a way to assess that non-formal and that informal learning. And TRU has gotten extremely good at it, and I know that's not a humble statement to make, but this next bullet here, TRU is one of the largest programs of prior learning assessment in Canada, arguably the world. There's a few bigger than us, but not many. And in BC, we award over 70% of the prior learning credit. Now, A couple of years ago, BC CAP funded us to do a research project on prior learning, RPL, VPL, so many different names for it, across the province. And for this here, we looked at the state of PLAR, and we looked at all the 25 post-secondary institutions, and these were some of the paths that we saw. So we saw prior learning could be in advanced entry, course-based, competency-based, which only 2 institutions do, and that's ourselves and Kwantlen Polytechnic, and we actually do it for KPU. And challenge exams, and then the big one, which is what I saved for last because this is what I'm going to spend more time talking about, and it's the credit bank. So with a show of hands, how many of you have heard of what a credit bank is? I'm impressed. It's a little bit more than I thought. Ben, I'm really glad you put up your hand. It's a way to pre-assess learning that isn't formal. So think about your community-based programs, your online courses, maybe through Coursera or other organizations that offer it. Private trainers, organizational training, whether we've been talking recently with the BC Wildfire Services, and how can we pre-assess some of the training? They offer over 100 training programs. How can we pre-assess that so that any learner that's been through that training, they don't have to prove to us that they know, they have the knowledge and the understanding, but that we can automatically give them credit through the TRU program. And then, of course, micro-credentials. We've embarked on the world of micro-credentials quite heavily with a variety of other schools. I'm just going to pause for a moment. The credit bank is a really important concept to understand. Does anybody have a question on what the credit bank is? Okay, I either really fumbled that one or it was crystal clear. Oh, I do see a hand. Yeah. You can find it, if you Google TRU Credit Bank, it'll come up pretty quick. So she asked where you can find that information. I'm following along here so I don't forget anything. I'm just going to show you this, my favorite image. Who knew you were going to see Legos twice in one day? So when you think about prior learning assessment, think of learning as the individual blocks of Legos, and they're hidden all over the house. Sometimes you step on them and you find them in odd places, but the little bits and pieces of learning, that's what PLAR is. We take that non-formal and that informal learning, we help students collect it to surface what that learning is. We help them articulate it, document what they've learned and how they've learned it, and then we help them put it in a way that we can assess it for possible credit. And this image works really well to show how you can take that block of Legos and build it up into something more meaningful. So that takes us to our next point. What does all this have to do with micro-credentials? In January 2023, we signed an agreement with the Ministry of Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills, TRU, and we hired a consultant. Many of you know David Porter. And we looked at, the goal of the project was, can we use a PLAR strategy, an assessment strategy, to assess micro-credentials for possible credit? It was that simple. There was a few pieces in particular that we looked at. So we wanted to look at, can we prototype, test, and document a repeatable process for assessing micro-credentials, as I said, to assign academic credit? Can we test existing processes, such as TRU's credit bank, for assessing prior learning as a potential tool? And TRU has had a credit bank since we became a university. It's part of our mandate, and that started, I guess, in about 2007. So, you know, we've had a number of years to refine this. And then to explore how assessed credits might be applied to BC post-secondary institution certificates, diplomas, undergraduate degrees, and programs. And that's the stacking and the laddering piece that's so important for student mobility and accessibility and equality. And then the easy one is to report out our findings, which we finished our report. Sorry, Ben, it was 202 pages, but there was a lot of appendices. I think the report itself was only 20-something pages. But, and then next week, actually, we're doing a webinar with similar information from today. Why did we do this, you may be asking? So I'm going to zoom out really quickly here and look at how micro-credentials has emerged as a strategy to support reskilling, upskilling, career resiliency. Those of you who know me, my second or third career was in career education. I love looking at labor market stats. My research has been focused on how students transition from the labor market to finding meaningful careers. And this information I'm about to share, this isn't a trend. These are structural changes that we're living through. So the World Economic Forum came up with a report in 2020, a jobs report, that talked about the importance of lifelong learning. And no longer do we go to school, we get that career, we maybe poke our heads back into learning once in a while, but nothing significant. Today's learners, today's people, today's society, they have to keep going back to school to upgrade their skills. Does it have to be formal education? I'm going to argue no, but those of you who know me aren't surprised by that. And how do we keep those learners, how do we help them, support them when they have a career, when they have children, when they're volunteering in their community? How do we help them build on that learning? How do we help them do it in a way that they can do after work, or they can do on the weekend, or in the evenings when the kids are in bed? So this is really important in that learning is ongoing. And my first career, I was a historian. So I can honestly say there's been no other time in history that we've had such significant changes with so much unpredictability so fast. So micro-credentials have been proposed as a strategy to enable the ongoing development of knowledge and skills across the workforce. And I added that little image on the side there. I can't quite zoom into it, but the report from the World Economic Forum says 50% of employees by 2025 will need to reskill or upskill. 50%. That was by 2025. The document's 3 years old now. I would say that's even higher today. Zooming down a little bit into the province, the future of jobs in BC, we've all heard the numbers that we have over 1 million openings in the next 10 years. Maybe 8 years, maybe 7 years. And that's because, as you know, it's the demographics. We have more people leaving the labor market than we do have entering it. We also have a challenge with the structural changes in the labor market. Think about the ChatGPT conversation we had today, other technology, and how quickly you need to learn these new technologies as they come in so that we can do our jobs differently, perhaps more efficiently. And so 80% of those new positions that are opening up will need some sort of post-secondary education. And the image on the side there just shows some of those high occupation growth areas. So no surprises here with technology and healthcare and engineering, a lot of what we've heard about already today. So just that very last bullet there, this demand for the structural changes in the labor market are not going to be met with current post-secondary education strategies. We need something different to reduce those barriers, to help people reskill and upskill, regardless of where they live in the province, regardless of what education they already have, something that is just-in-time delivery, what they need when they need it. And as I've said, micro-credentials is a way to offer that. Now, how many of you, well, that's an unfair question. Sorry, Mike. I was going to ask, how many of you are tired of hearing from Mike? It's Ralph, right? You guys can talk later. I was in Vancouver for a meeting, had to be about 2 months ago, and we were talking about Provincial Credit Bank Initiative. And Mike used a metaphor that I want to use today to talk about micro-credentials. He used the metaphor, he said, building the plane while it's in the air. And I've had people ask me, what are micro-credentials and how are they changing? They're very transient right now. It's hard to find a shared definition. It's hard to find shared consistency in what are micro-credentials, how are we developing them, how are we delivering them. So it really does feel like we're building the airplane in the air. And there's a lot of excitement about that, and there's also a lot of fear and trepidation. Nobody's going to go flying with me soon, are they? Yeah. So we wanted to look at how can you assess micro-credentials that have often not gone through the institution's governance processes, often are done off of the side of people's desks to build a program to say, okay, We're noticing that we really need a specialization in software security. We don't have time, or perhaps it's because the government has had some amazing funding to develop micro-credentials. They build the micro-credential and offer it to students, but it hasn't gone through governance process, meaning it's not in any articulation agreements, it's not shared, and often, most of the time, it's not transcriptable on students' transcripts. So we wanted to see how can we assess these micro-credentials so that they can be stackable and ladderable, so that they can be introduced into post-secondary institution credits. So how did we do that? We started a project with 12 key steps, and I'm going to go through each of those steps and not painstakingly detail, because we don't have that much time. Now these steps, 12 steps, but we also did them interchangeably. I'll present them very linear, but it wasn't that easy. The very first thing we did is we wanted to see who else was working with micro-credentials, how were they assessing them, what could we learn from other proven practices. So we looked at some of the Canadian resources, and we noticed that Alberta, Ontario, New Brunswick. I had a meeting this morning before the conference started, and we were talking about a presentation I'm doing in 2 weeks on micro-credentials. And they said, we wish we were as advanced as BC. You guys are leading the way. And that was really good to hear. Even though they have a framework, they think ours is better. And there's that document there with the blue screen, the micro-credential framework that was published in 2020, which is now going through a really healthy revision. So we are leading the way on this. Nova Scotia and PEI also have frameworks. But then we looked further afield. We looked at, as we've heard talk about today, Australia, New Zealand, and the European Union, and we found some really good resources. So when we did the environmental scan and the needs assessment, we also then next, we looked at, where's the Ontario table? Yeah, thank you for this. So we went through, and one of the research pieces we found was this amazing graphic from HECO. What are the quality features required of micro-credential programs? And these 6 pieces just really hit home for us, so we adopted them as good researchers do. Relevant to the student, to the community, to the industry. Accredited, recognized, or issued by professional accrediting body. So that can be post-secondary institutions, but it can also be some of the employment groups as well. Now this is where we're getting into interesting territory, standardized. As we build this airplane in the air, there isn't standardized processes for how to build, how to assess micro-credentials. So to assess them, we had to build something to look at that. We needed confidence, we needed rigor, that was what was being assessed, we had confidence that the credits were deserved. The micro-credentials have to be assessed. I was talking at my table earlier at lunch saying, I can sit in a class for 30 hours and learn absolutely nothing. Or I can come to a conference, hear a couple of really strong speakers, and learn more in 20 minutes or an hour than I can in an actual course. But that knowledge has to be assessed. There has to be a consistent way to assess what was learned and how it can be applied. Flexible is really important as the labor market changes and as society gets more complicated. How do you access this? And as we heard yesterday, online learning is increasingly becoming more and more requested. And then, of course, stackable. We want all these little bits and pieces of Legos to build into something much bigger for the learners, for the community members, for the province, so that they can demonstrate what they know without having to repeat that education. So next, or in alignment, we assembled what we called a couple of different names. A steering committee probably describes it best. But we reached out to some of the thought leaders in the province and asked them to sit with us and to look at how can we assess micro-credentials. BC CAT had a really important role there, as did BCIT. Of course, the ministry was involved. We had excellent representation from them. Vancouver Community College, Royal Roads, KPU, UBCO, and TRU. So we met and we talked about the research that was done, the needs assessment, and the environmental scan, took a look at TRU's resources for how do we assess credit bank, and put together our heads and thought, how can we make this better? We also selected micro-credentials. Now, as I said earlier, the provincial government has been very generous with providing funding to develop micro-credentials for post-secondary institutions. So we looked at the first round of funding and the second round of funding, and these were the 10 micro-credentials that we decided to assess. You can see they're very eclectic and wide variety, everything from mass timber sales and actually a couple other in forestry, production assistant in film, metabolomics, which I did not know what that was until this project started, data literacy skills, hospitality. And so we selected micro-credentials to assess. We already had our tool well developed based on what TRU was already using, but then borrowing the best practices. And now it was time to assess. So this is something that's hard to see. I use Prezi a lot, and I was picturing being able to zoom in. I can't do that today, but the PowerPoint is in the app, and if you want to see this tool, I'm happy to share it. But we looked at 22 different fields on what to assess and how to assess it. And I'm just going to open up mine a little bit bigger on here so I make sure I have my vocabulary right. Okay, so what we looked at was what was assessed. I'm going to go back. What we looked at was the 22 fields, some really simple ones. Who's offering the micro-credential? Who developed it? How was it developed? What institution do they belong to? What is their qualifications for developing their subject matter expertise? And then we dove right into the learning. How do we know what was taught was learned? What was assessed? What was that volume of learning? How does it fit with other areas in that institution? We also looked at, is it already recognized for credit in the institution? And so the 22 fields on that were something that actually took us quite a bit of time to develop. But I'm going to use those words I've already used. It was really important to be rigorous, to look at best practices, because if we're giving out credit for these micro-credentials that are already have some skepticism around them, we really wanted to be confident that these credits were deserved. And then this is where the province was very patient with us. We decided to step away from our agreement. We were going to go next to having external assessors once this form was completed, to review the form and make recommendations on credit. Instead, we decided to add a step that we hadn't initially thought, and that was, how many of you have been involved in a program review? Okay, most of you. So we thought that we would take that knowledge and have the people that develop the micro-credentials fill this form, do a self-study, so to speak. And that was a wonderful, wonderful addition, because not only did they take a look at some consistent language, the rigor of what to assess and how to assess it, but they really had to reflect on what they were teaching, why they were teaching it, how they were teaching it. And then they gave us feedback on how to improve the form. So that was really good. We took that feedback, we applied it, and then we gave it, as we initially planned, to external assessors. And in the meantime, we also collected the data, summarized it, and had a really big appendix for the report. But we were doing a lot of question, what did we learn from this, and how can we take what we've learned from this from proof of concept and grow it bigger? We redesigned the data form, and then we went to the external assessors. And the external assessors, we were very careful in how we selected them. We had very specific criteria. So we wanted them to have some subject matter expertise, demonstrated analytical and critical thinking skills, understanding of learning outcomes, ethical conduct. The metabolomics course or micro-credential that we assessed was proprietary, and they did not want to share that information to the general public. And so those ethical conduct was really important. And then, of course, experience in program development. Once we had the assessors selected and chosen, then we also put them through asynchronous and synchronous training to make sure that they understood what their responsibilities were for the assessment process. And then they went to work to assess the micro-credentials, and 8 of the 10 were awarded credit. Now, the credits really varied from 1 credit, and I believe that was for the data literacy, but the metabolomics, the assessors actually looked at it and said, this isn't undergraduate work, we recommend this is graduate work. Can we give credits for graduate level? And that was something we hadn't explored yet. So then after they did those assessments, now what we're doing is we're putting them through the TRU credit bank. So what that means is that I think we still have 2 or 3 agreements we still need signatures on, but what that means is that any student that's been through those micro-credentials, then they can now get credit for it through TRU if they were approved for credit. This takes me to what we learned. I had those 4 slides at the beginning, kind of like the goals of the project. What were we exploring? So what we know is micro-credentials can be assessed for academic credit using a repeatable process. It can be scaled up as well. Existing tools could be strengthened, and we took a lot of time to do that. It was really important as you look at other institutions offering up their micro-credentials to be assessed, to be transparent, and as I've said many times, as rigorous as possible, and that they can be stacked and laddered. Next steps. This is the one I wasn't too sure what I was going to speak about here. Next steps, we're discussing with the province the scalability of this. So what happens if we take 40 or 50 micro-credentials, apply the same methodology to it for assessment? How scalable is it? And what about micro-credentials that aren't offered by post-secondary institutions? We've seen those out and around. IBM has some amazing micro-credentials. How can we assess that type of learning? And then we are also in conversations with the provincial government on developing a provincial credit bank with BC CAT that will have an open repository of all the TRUs, all of the assessment work that we're doing, so that any post-secondary institution can access it, see what was assessed, how it was assessed, and decide if they want to give students credit for those micro-credentials. Okay, this takes me back to my very last slide and this wolf. TRU has this amazing statue of a group of wolves going out on a hunt. And I chose this intentionally because it really symbolizes what we're doing. We're trying to be very observant. We're trying to work together. We're trying to be flexible, but again, working as a team. And also to be very strategic and intentional in what we do, just like a wolf pack does when they're hunting. And that is it. I'm ready for questions.
All right, well, turn on the mic. All right, we got some questions in the front, so we've got a microphone runner coming up. And we've also got some questions already lined up online, so please keep putting those into the Q&A. And we'll pass it over to, did you get the microphone? Who got the microphone?
It's a quick question.
Okay, Annalie.
Annalie from UCW, University of Canada West. The question is on the provincial credit bank. The discussions have just started. Is there a timeline projection?
Oh, go on the microphone.
My understanding is quickly as we can get it done, but thorough. So maybe there'll be an announcement December, January.
Oh, thank you.
All right, we'll take a question from the online audience. There's quite a few up here. One's just a basic question. What's the difference between a micro-credential and a certificate or a diploma?
I saw that question and I thought, how am I best going to answer it? And that's part of building that airplane while we're on the road. I've heard people say micro-credentials, you just take parts of a course, you parcel it out, maybe it's the competencies, maybe it's certain elements, much smaller bite-sized pieces of learning, and that's a micro-credential. And I've heard people say, hell no, that is not, it can't replicate what's already in the classes. It has to be something new. It has to be something that's in demand for the labor market. So for me, the difference is micro-credentials are much smaller bits and pieces of learning, but we're still developing that shared vernacular, that shared common language around what micro-credentials are. The provincial government has a very robust definition. The European Union's definition is even better. So yeah, it's a good question.
All right, do we have any more questions in the room? Okay, we've got a microphone coming up for you, Adrian.
Thank you, Adrian Galway from ONCAT in Ontario. Great presentation, a hot topic across the country, clearly. I'm a little unclear about something you said. So you assess the micro-credential and it's for credit, but credit toward what? Like if it's supposed to be learned, in Ontario it's been defined as something that is employer, but in demand, vocationally focused. Often there's not a course like that in an undergraduate degree, maybe in a diploma program, but then it's in the diploma program. It's not a micro-credential. So if you give it credit, where do they take it? Does it stack towards a degree from Thompson River?
Yeah.
And how do you determine what program you apply that against?
So that's part of the subject matter experts that assess the micro-credentials. They tell us where it best fits into the TRU's program. With the Provincial Credit Bank, more thought will have to be given to that so that the other institutions can decide where it fits best in their courses, in their programs, and in their institutional learning outcomes. But if we can at least collect that raw data so they can make informed decisions. But yes, that is it. It's for credit towards their certificates, diplomas, degrees.
Sorry, can I ask one follow-up then? So does that mean that represents a course they do not have to take if they enroll in the program?
Yeah. Yeah, why would they need to repeat learning if it's already going to help them complete that chunk of learning they're involved in? Yeah.
All right. And maybe just before we get to Jean's question, I'll just piggyback because you mentioned assessors, and there's a question from the chat regarding how are micro-credential assessors compensated for that work?
Ooh, I like this one. I used to have a boss that told me this should be the faculty service work, and I kept saying, I'm going to swear again. I kept saying, hell no. They are compensated for it, and we were paying up to 8 hours, $100 an hour. When you think about the knowledge that they've acquired over their careers, you think about the cognitive abilities they need to use for this, and the responsibility they have. Yeah, we do compensate them for it, and you can tell, I think we should.
All right, Jean, you're up.
Thanks for the presentation. That was great. I think my question's more to you, Mike. You were working on a project around how, of course, A transfers between or to institution B, and then does that course then transfer to institution C, and how does that work between those institutions? So my question is really, will micro-credentials that might be accepted as laddering into one institution transfer to another?
Well, I mean, that's an opportunity that's there. So the process you're referring to is triangulation. We did take a look at it on a course level. The project that Jen Cook is working on with Pathways, there's potential there because we'll be looking at program-to-program relationships. So I'd say the opportunity is there, and we'll see where it goes. We've met with Susan a couple of times now regarding the credit bank. I think it's a very exciting project and has a lot of potential. So I guess I'll say stay tuned.
That's an excellent question. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Thomas, presenting from the Extended School of Management. My question was actually, when you create some sort of assessment based on individual learning outcomes, so some of the assessments are getting very unique and very popular, such as experiential learning. Experiential learning?
Yes.
Yeah, so how do you see or how do you define or differentiate between experiential learning and micro-credential, and how do you assess them?
That's another really good question. You're moving into some of the PLAR work that we're doing, and we have this amazing PLAR program. It's called Competency-Based PLAR, and that's where TRU has institutional learning outcomes that we've stripped down, and they're basic transversal skills or employability skills. Think about communication, intellectual maturity, creativity, information organization, numeracy, so there's 8 of them that we strip down, and we actually have students develop portfolios to talk about each of those 8 competencies and evidence each and every piece. But this is very different from the credit bank because the students do this. This is what they do themselves. We have we have a really good way to assess this learning, and depending on how many electives they have in their program of study, they can get electives for those 8 competencies. And so if you're in Bachelor of Commerce, and this is only for open learning students, we don't have this available for campus students yet, but let's say they're in Bachelor of Commerce and they might have 12 lower level elective room credits open, they can get all 12 through their competency-based PLAR. So that experiential learning, as long as they don't already have credit for it in some way, shape, or form, and we do check that pretty hard, they can go back to those Legos. We help them find what that learning is. We help them build it up into a way that we can assess it, and then we can give them credits towards it. Now, our Bachelor of General Studies program, because it has so much elective room, they can get 60 lower level credits and 15 upper level credits. And so that's 75 credits, depending on how many electives they already have. So that experiential learning comes into those types of PLAR quite extensively, into course-based PLAR as well, where we look at the learning outcomes of the course and the students talk about their learning based on that. And I know my time's up.
Thank you.
One thing I want to share, because it was mentioned this morning about decolonization and indigenization, that whole question about epistemology and whose knowledge is most valued in society. With our PLAR program, we're embarking on decolonization and indigenization, working with the communities to how do we assess their cultural knowledge so that they can get credit for that. So we're opening it up. We're trying to get that experiential learning from different people, different backgrounds, different ways of knowing, trying to make it much more equitable, because PLAR right now is a very colonized process.
I think that's a good way to pivot to a question that's online from Tyler Ballum, who's asking about whether continuing education would be a part of the credit bank.
Yeah, a lot of the micro-credentials that we assessed or that we looked at assessing were built through continuing education programs. Off the top of my head, I'd say well over half.
And there's another question online that was, I think it was sent in actually even before, so you might have already seen it. How can we establish an effective articulation process for micro-credentials in BC to ensure their seamless integration into the broader educational system? So you've touched upon quite a bit of that already. I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to add on that.
You know, I just think you get people that want to do this, get us together, get us talking about it, get us testing some things, learn from your mistakes. And you work with like-minded people, and you build that plane as you're flying it. How many times have I said that today, Mike? I think it's possible, but it takes a lot of work. Those little baby steps, reflect on what did you learn, what worked, what didn't work, analyze it, and go to the next step. Maybe it's sideways sometimes it's backwards. But we can see the structural changes in our society and what's coming. We see the currency of post-secondary education being eroded, in my opinion. And this is a way that we can increase the currency with so many learners and industries and organizations.
Do we have any more questions from the room? All right, not seeing any, and I think we've cleared the questions on the online chat. So I just want to thank you, Susan, for this presentation. This was excellent. Thank you.